It feels good to be back. If you missed my update, let me just fill you in now. Last week I had a bit of a heat stroke / anxiety situation. Long story short, I went to stay with my folks in their much cooler house whilst I recovered from all that mess. The only problem was my computer is in my flat, and so are all the assets I'd need to make the video, you know, the footage and these fun little sprites, they were all back home. Hence why this video is late. Anyway, this week is another installment of my Things I Already Talked About as Board Gamer series. We're looking at Hellpoint, an indie-developed sci-fi Souls-like that first dropped in 2020, you know, that year we all kind of pretend never happened. Though it's not as if subsequent years have been any better. I have this theory that it's time travelers we have to blame. Whoever keeps going back in time to try and prevent the events of 2020, I know you mean well, but you keep making things worse. Still, at least we have video games to distract ourselves from the perpetual nightmare that reality has become. As I said a minute ago, today's topic is another from my collection of games covered during my board gamer phase, but I think this one is a more logical choice for a re-review. Unlike most of the other games that I'll do a re-review of, I didn't actually write a script for that original Hellpoint video, I just rambled for ages over some footage I took, and well, that doesn't really do the game justice, does it? It's a wrong that I seek to right.
Ronica, next week, do you think you could talk about something you haven't already covered before?
Yeah, this re-review phase has really gone on long enough, hasn't it? It's sometimes hard to choose something to commit a week to, you know? There's a lot of games out there, and I find myself spoiled for choice, but having too many options can be, well, overwhelming. But anyway, let's get on with Hellpoint, and I promise next week we'll try to cover a game that I haven't spoke about previously, okay? Stray. We'll talk about Stray next week. Hopefully. Hellpoint is a third-person action RPG in the Souls-like mold, developed by Cradle Games, previously responsible for Merge Gems and Inside Ball. 2 mobile titles available on the Play Store, and all I can say is, fucking hell, this is a leap. Going from developing shitty mobile games to a full 3D Souls-like is like going from building a 10-piece Lego set to constructing a functioning Death Star, and upon learning this I find I have more respect for the devs, as this sort of thing does take talent and vision. I also can't say I blame them. If I made 2 basic Android titles that no one cared about, I too would be seeking to try something new. Besides, neither of their Android games even have any user reviews or proper ratings. I almost feel bad for them and kind of want to try those 2 games out, but to be perfectly honest, neither of them look very good, so I'm not going to. If you like this video and want to support the channel, there are a few ways you can do that. First of all, you can give this video a like, maybe leave a comment and subscribe for future content. To support the channel directly, go to my Patreon page and pledge £1 a month. This will get you 24 hours early access to new review videos, shoutouts at the end of videos, and you'll even get to suggest games for me to cover. Or if you'd like something more tangible back for your support, then head over to my tinyBuild shop. The links to both my tinyBuild shop and my Patreon page are in the description of this video, so be sure to check them out. I really need to weave that bit in a bit more naturally. In Hellpoint, we play as a spawn, a being created by an AI called the Author, and we're sent on a mission to gather data from a space station city that is infested with Cenobite rejects and demons. The station, Idrid Novo, hopefully I pronounced that right, doesn't matter, was a collaboration between humans and the Arisen civilization, with both groups working together to see if they can solve the mystery of whether or not the soul is real. Lost yet? Yeah, I'll be honest with you, I've had to get that from the game's wiki page because none of that was made clear. Well, at least it's trying to be a Souls-like in that it's got an incomprehensible plot for us to pick through immediately. You start the game in this pool, playing as Pinhead's malnourished brother, and you're given the vague instructions to move forward and meet up with the Author. Like in any good Souls-like, you'll have to brutally murder pretty much everything standing between you and your goal whilst watching your stamina bar, because if it drains and you're surrounded by enemies, then oh boy, I hope you've got your affairs in order. You don't choose a class or anything when you start, you don't even have character customization in this game, which is a bit of a bummer for someone like me, but it's not really a big deal. You'll quickly find your first weapon and shield and learn the basics of combat. It's another case of picking enemies off one by one, dodging when the time is right, and remembering to heal your dozy git. That's the bit that often throws me. That's how I get myself killed a lot playing Souls-likes, as I forget to heal and I get dead. There are some rather significant changes to the formula this time around though. For starters, you don't get your healing items back when you use checkpoints. Instead, you charge their uses by inflicting melee damage. The same goes for the energy bar, which you need for using guns and casting abilities. Hit things with melee weapons to build it back up so you can utilise useful skills and firearms. If, like me, you're coming fresh from another replaying of Dark Souls, then this system does take an adjustment, and it can be quite frustrating when you have to hobble back to the checkpoint with more stab wounds than a typical Londoner, only to find that whilst your health recovers, your vital healing items do not. Typically in a Souls-like, you have one primary healing tool that recovers when you use a checkpoint. In Hellpoint, not so much. Using checkpoints also doesn't respawn the enemies like it does in other games of this ilk. This means that when I was struggling, I could take each enemy out one by one, go back to the checkpoint to heal, you know, so I don't use up any of my healing items that don't recharge when I use the goddamn checkpoints, then slowly venture forth again. It can be a bit tedious at times, but once you get the enemy movesets down, you'll find you'll need to use this method less and less. This system also lets us feel like we're making progress through the level. Sometimes one or two enemies will respawn if you keep keep resting, but I can't tell if that was intentional or just a bug, but we'll touch on the buggery later. On the subject of enemies, there are two main types in this game. You've got these little dudes who look like the Cenobite rejects, I know I've said that before, but it's just a comparison I can't stop making. And there are also a variety of weird demons to fight. Speaking of the demons, you'll see more of them appear during a time span called the Black Hole Hour. See, the station Idrin Novovo, I can never say that out loud for some reason, is in orbit around a black hole, and twice per orbit the station dips into the accretion disk of the black hole to recharge its energy.
The accretion disk, for those who don't know, is a disk-like flow of gas, plasma, dust, and whatever other particles that are unfortunate enough to port in the orbit of a massive object, in this case, your mama. In this case, a black hole. The stuff spins around and around, then thanks to our goofy friend friction, the bits get heated up, then glow like a motherfucker. There you go, Ronica. Now you can mark this video as educational.
But this proximity to the black hole makes it easier for demons to cross into this plane of reality. You know what's kind of weird is when me and my friends were kids, we used to play pretend as demons, and we had this whole lore about black holes being like the demon's source of power, so I don't know, it's not relevant, it's just something I thought was interesting. God, I miss being a kid. Also, during these black hole hours, you could encounter sections of the map that have been sealed off, and you'd enter them like you'd enter a boss room. There'd be some sort of fog wall. Well, it's not a fog wall in Hellpoint, not really, it's whatever this wall is meant to be, I can't really tell. And you'll basically be tasked with killing wave after wave of spawning enemies. These bits can be a bit of a trial, but if it is too hard, then you can always just wait for the hour to pass, go off and kill some other things, then when the time passes you can come back and claim your souls from your point of death. Though you do have to get killed for that plan to work, although that probably won't be too hard. No wait, not souls, they're not souls this time, they're axions. These are the things that we gather from our enemies as we kill them, and they're vital for our level ups. Hellpoint also mixes up the whole death mechanic because this time around when you die you sometimes see a ghost version of your dead self. Sometimes it's easy enough to avoid, but other times it'll be impossible to get away without having to fight the bloody thing. It can be a bit annoying, but here's a good tip. It will only be armed with the exact loadout you had when you bit the dust, so you'll know all its movesets, and also it's not controlled by a player. No, instead it's controlled by the AI, so therefore it lacks that survival instinct and the ability to improvise that us lovely humans have. More than once I managed to trick it into walking off a cliff, and not even trick it just sort of walked off a cliff. I guess it wanted to die again. Like any good self-respecting Souls-like, each level is of the linear open-ended variety and usually has a big ugly boss sat at the end for you to take on. There aren't that many bosses in this game, and a lot of them end up recycled as common enemies later on, and we all know how much Auntie Ronica loves this bollocks now, don't we? This Celestial Beast, for example, who acts as the second boss, is a pretty cool design, ignoring the very stock raw sound effect that plays when it's attacking you. It's quite interesting to look at and I rather like it, but then we see smaller versions of itself appear all over the later levels like it just queefed out a batch of bastard children, and for fuck's sake, that's a mental image I didn't need to give myself. This big armoured enemy here, depending on which way you go, you might encounter the standard enemy version before even seeing the boss version, which has basically no distinction outside the health bar. I mean, it might be a bit bigger, I can't really tell, who knows or even cares to be honest. These two slender men who act like a poor man's version of Ornstein and Smoke, yep, you guessed it, they're recycled a lot in the later levels, although this time around they actually look like standard enemies, so maybe they were just standard enemies that were made into bosses, who knows, and whilst part of me wants to cut the devs some slack given the background we discussed earlier, the critical part of me is saying reusing bosses as standard late game enemies completely undermines the mystique and uniqueness of the boss itself. Maybe they just ran out of monster ideas. I can think of a few for you. How about a three-legged bug thing with 5 eyes and a sucker-like mouth atop its head that bites and spits acid? Or maybe a snake-like thing which drags itself along with its muscular forearms and attacks with wide sweeps on the spiked tail. On the spiked tail? And a spiked tail is what I meant to say. Oh, one more. How about a security unit that rolls around on tracks and is armed with a stun weapon that attacks NPC and player alike as it tries in vain to contain the demonic outbreaks? I'll be honest, I just wanted an excuse to draw some weird shit. The bosses that they don't recycle are pretty cool though. There's this giant elder god thing and Satan's younger brother Randy. It's not actually his name. Randy's not his name, it's just a joke. Both are quite cool, and then there's this giant multi-armed clown demon thing, and you know what, I'm just glad that their encounters and defeats feel special because they were all unique. Either way, murder everything you can and gather 100% of the data that you need to meet the author, and shortly after doing so you'll be given whatever ending you were working towards. I've only seen one so far, apparently there are 4, so give me enough time and supplies and I'll see them all through as well.
Or you could go outside, get a job and be useful to society.
Nah, I'd rather fuck over my diet and sleep schedule by playing Hellpoint to death.
Fair enough, worth a try.
I have had a much better time with Hellpoint than I ever have before, though that isn't to say there aren't still valid criticisms to be made, and just to remind you little devil's advocates out there, God, I hope I used that right. A game being made by an independent studio cannot use this fact as a shield against legitimate criticism. It's just simply not some magical get-out-of-jail-free card. I know there are some people out there who think that just because a game is made by a smaller studio that it means we cannot judge the game at all, and, well, those people are just categorically wrong. I've already covered the boss recycling, so we'll leave that bit alone. The next big issue for me is the lack of a toolbar. We can only have one healing item accessible to us at a time. Usually you'll want this to be your healing syringe, the one you start the game with, because it's the best of the options. It takes effect fast and restores you to 100% HP. However, if you need to go outside at any point or you're fighting enemies who deal radiation damage, then you'll need the blue syringe to cure that. This means you'll have to quickly open your menu and equip it before you can even use it. Just let us equip more than one tool at a time, please. Other games have got this right for years. Next up is the barrage of glitches and bugs. Enemies often just flat out disappeared when killed in a way that was clearly not intentional, when sometimes their ragdolls could get flung around like mad when they did stick around. Some enemies found it way too easy to clip into walls. Sometimes you can swing your weapon at an enemy and it will do no damage despite the damage counter saying so, or the weapon will just pass right through it harmlessly. In the former events case this was common when enemies spawned out of vents, and in the latter case it was random as fuck when it happened. Hitboxes are a bit questionable for some enemy attacks, and whilst the game does feature jumping as a prominent mechanic and even has the player utilise it to complete levels and reach new gear and secrets, the game has a 1 in 10 chance of just ignoring your input and letting your spawn fall to their death. Also, as said earlier, sometimes enemies will respawn when you use a checkpoint, and I'm still not sure if this was intentional or not, though I have my doubts. Another key issue in the game is its duplicate treasures. After you defeat the second boss of the game, you choose one of two routes to take for the next few hours, and both have a lot of the same armor sets and weapons to be found, which cheapens the experience it's had. And it would be nice if the subtitles had some sort of backing so I could read the bloody things. All dialogue in this game is spoken in an alien language. At least I assume the language is alien. Either that or I just need to experience the world more. So subtitles are necessary, but half the time I have to rotate the camera for ages just trying to find an angle where I can read it from. Oh, and one time I got trapped in a room that was supposed to be used for one of those hordes, but I entered it just before the black hole hour and I couldn't get out. The enemies wouldn't spawn either. It was annoying, to say the least. I ended up having to jump down the hole in the middle of the room just to get out of there. However, there's an enjoyable game behind all these issues, and one that I didn't appreciate up till now. At its core, Hellpoint is a decently fun game, and given the studio's previous products, it's fucking impressive that it all works together as well as it does. I'd love to see what else they come out with following Hellpoint. I believe we're in for some DLC soon, at least that's what it says in the script here. That's probably dropped by now because this review is way late. Either way, I'll have to have a look, and I'm quite happy to go back and start a new character and dig through the whole thing again. I rather enjoyed exploring the levels and finding cool gear and encountering new monsters, especially this dude who's got the mouth for a belly. He's quite cool. It's a shame he's also just a recycled boss, but the enemy design on its own is still quite cool. There's a healthy variety of equipment to play with. Each of your weapons unlocks a skill if you use it for long enough, which I like. There's your standard crafting system in the game, which fair enough I suppose. I mean, I don't know why it's here, but I don't know why it's in most games, and my disgust with crafting systems has been well established. Well, disgust is the wrong word. I don't hate them, I just don't see the point in them half the time. The game does have a bit of an issue with failing to explain things to you, but that's just another Souls-like trait, isn't it? It's just what these games do. I did also find it more difficult to get immersed in this world's lore, though after a while I found myself somewhat hooked, so I'll give it credit for that. I might have to see if anyone's done a deep dive of it on YouTube so I can fill myself in. The game has a very strong atmosphere and art style, and I find art style is more important than graphics. I've said that before a lot, but I'm going to say it again because I believe it to be true. If you told me this was a PS3 era game, I'd probably believe you and just not ask any further questions. I like the designs of a lot of the weapons and equipment you can find. I didn't like the armors all that much, although I did find one set that I eventually really fell in love with, so it's all good. There's also a lot of variety to the builds that you can run. Usually I play as a slow tank that relies on a heavy shield to get through the game, though this time around I played as a fast, dodgy sort of person, and it was a lot more fun. In fact, having more fun was a common theme this time around. I found the exploring to be a lot more entertaining. I really liked finding new gear and weapons and discovering monsters. That cloud boss I mentioned earlier, I'd never seen him before this recent playthrough. He was really cool when I encountered him. I was like, oh hell yeah, this is the sort of monster design I can dig. I guess this modern, more open-minded version of me is ready to recommend the game, if only so I'll have someone to play with in the future. I swear I searched for allies and other players in need for about 2 hours and 13 minutes, as you could just turn the matchmaking on and go about your business. But nothing. I didn't get anything. Seriously, at one point I literally waited an entire hour before I turned the matchmaking off, thinking, oh, bollocks to it, no one's going to appear. It's a shame. I found people in the past and they were bloody helpful. I don't think they even disappeared when the boss was defeated. You just sort of keep playing with I was about to say playing with yourself. That was going to be the wrong sentence. I'm leaving that in there because it's amusing to me. You could just keep playing with the other player and keep going. It was fun. I liked it.
You know, I kind of like these episodes actually, where you look at a game you previously dismissed and despised, only to discover that there was more there to enjoy.
You know what? So do I. Having a look back at a game that I was originally dismissive of only to really enjoy it is a good feeling, to be perfectly honest with you. It happened with Demon's Souls. I tried to make it happen with, what was that other game? That really boring one with the robots. Who gives a shit? Let's hope that next week's game doesn't have to go through the same cycle. I'm 80% sure it's going to be a game called Stray. It's about a cat. That should be fun. Anyway, thank you so much for watching. Again, I really do apologise that this video was delayed. I'm going to try to avoid dying from heat this week. It was really unpleasant. I am not properly equipped to deal with even a slight raise in temperature because I'm a giant pussy. But until next time, take care. Love you all. Bye-bye.